Tears of House Marisol by C.T. Stewart. Selene stood at the edge of the tidal cliffs, her cloak whipped by the salty winds that rushed up from the sea far below. An early moon hung low in the sky, reflecting its pale glow on waters that churned in the gathering dusk. To her right, the path dropped off sharply, a jagged line of rock tumbling downward to the swirling depths. To her left, sheer stone walls rose into the darkening horizon. She inhaled the cool night air, her heart heavy but resolute. She had come here seeking the home of a powerful artifact, hoping for a cure to that which plagued her family. Selene was the third daughter of House Marisol, a once proud lineage of healers and herbalists in the kingdom of Morne. Gifted with a gentle spirit and a keen mind, she was a paragon of her family's sagely wisdom and power. That was until her eldest sister, Elora, fell deathly ill from a mysterious curse that none of her house could break, including Selene. All her medicinal skills, every scroll of knowledge in the family library, none had seemed to do anything more than prolong Elora's suffering. What the curse was, or who had cast it, Selene had no idea. On top of that, whispers had begun that if Selene could not cure her sister, perhaps she would not be worthy of taking the succession in her place. After dozens of nights of research in the library, there appeared to be only one possibility left. Selene departed under cover of night, traveling by foot through haunted marshes and dense forests, skillfully avoiding bandits and monstrous creatures alike. Though exhausted, her determination glowed in her eyes. If the artifact existed, she would find it or die trying. As Selene scanned the rocky coastline for any sign of the hidden entrance, a flash of movement caught her eye. A slim figure stood in the moonlight, just a handful of steps away. It was Eldris. She had sent by letter to him at the suggestion of her sister, and he had agreed to meet her here to lend his ranger skills to her efforts. He had helped a younger Selene gather rare herbs on a perilously steep cliff near his village. She had never quite forgotten his unwavering smile, or the way he'd rescued a bird tangled in brambles. "Selene," he said softly, inclining his head in greeting, "are you still the bright-eyed apothecary who taught me that healing is more important than harming?" Selene couldn't help but return his smile. "I'm still me," she said, "but life is far more complicated than it used to be." "Perhaps I can help make it simpler," Eldris offered. He gestured down to a narrow trail. "If you're seeking a way down the cliffs, I've already found one. It was very well hidden, but it seems to lead to a cavern with some rune markings near the entrance." Without waiting for an answer, Eldris moved off, confident and swift. Selene hesitated but felt something in her heart nudge her to trust him. She followed, carefully placing her feet on the path worn smooth by centuries of crashing waves and howling winds. The path spiraled down, just like Eldris said, down into a tunnel that opened into a grand cavern. Stalagmites jutted from the floor, shimmering with faint luminescence. The sound of trickling water echoed, and phosphorescent moss bathed the stone walls in a soothing green glow. In the center was a circular dais engraved with sigils that Selene half recognized from her family's studies of the old sage ways. A sense of awe washed over her. This had to be the shrine the writings of the monk from the library had described. Selene pointed to a large figure carved into the rock. "I recognize that as the Ocean Mother from the writings in the library, a legendary entity of healing and rebirth. If there is a healing artifact, it might be hidden nearby." Selene carefully examined the likeness and noticed a small indentation near its base. It looked like a place for a key or pendant. She dug through her satchel, sifting aside potions and dried flowers, until she found a circular pendant that had been in her family for generations, a piece of frosted crystal on a thin silver chain. It had once belonged to her mother and was said to glow faintly when near the ocean's waters. Now, under the mossy light, it caught the faintest sparkle. Her sister had told her it was important. "I don't know if this will fit," Selene murmured, but she pressed the pendant into the indentation. To her astonishment, it clicked into place perfectly. A low rumbling made them step back. The entire dais shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Within lay a smooth orb, faintly pulsating with soft blue light. Selene gasped at its quiet beauty. "This must be it," she whispered. "The Ocean Mother's tear." She lifted it carefully in both hands. It was lighter than she expected, almost weightless. As she held it, tears threatened to well up in her eyes. The relief she felt was nearly overwhelming. After months of helplessness and guilt, here at last was a glimmer of hope for Elora. Eldris placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've come so far. You deserve this." Before she could thank him, however, a voice interrupted from the darkness. "I believe it is time for me to take that." Selene and Eldris spun to see a tall figure emerging from the shadows. He wore a black cloak trimmed with crimson, and sharp scars cut across his left cheek. Selene's heart seized with panic. She recognized him. It was Varen, her sister's keeper of the guard. "Varen," Selene exclaimed. "You couldn't possibly." Varen sneered. "I did not think the Ocean Mother's tear was real, but you have gone and found it. That is quite remarkable, but I cannot allow it to be used on your sister." Selene tightened her grip on the orb. "You cursed Elora." A mocking laugh escaped Varen's lips. "But of course, one heir of Marisol down and one to go. Who do you think made sure you discovered that old manuscript in the library? I needed leverage to draw you out and make it look like an accident. I suspected you would venture into the kingdom's darkest corners to save your family." A cool voice cut through the darkness. "Selene, just give it to him." She turned and looked squarely at Eldris. His eyes were cold, focused not on her but on the orb she clutched. "Eldris," she whispered, feeling her blood turn to ice. He bowed his head, shame flickering in his gaze. "I promised Varen I would lead you here in exchange for the orb. I do not intend to hurt you." Selene's heart twisted. She recalled the day he had first helped her gather herbs, how she trusted him. Now she felt betrayal deep in her core. You tricked me." Eldris swallowed hard, pain haunting his face. "My father is under a curse as well. One that orb can possibly break. I had no choice." Fury and heartbreak warred in Selene's chest. She felt used and naive, but she also understood the desperation that made Eldris susceptible to Varen's manipulation. She stood, positioning herself between them and the dais. "I won't let you take it," she said, voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. "This is my only chance to save Elora." Varen took advantage of her distraction, chanting words in a guttural tongue. Selene felt a sudden jolt. Pain shot through her, and she dropped to one knee, the orb rolling away on the stone floor, her arm rendered useless at her side. Disarmed by agony, Selene watched helplessly as Varen picked up the orb, his eyes gleaming with triumphant greed. In that moment, she thought of Elora lying pale and motionless back home. She thought of everyone who had scorned her for failing to cure her sister. Despair engulfed her, and she felt as though her spirit would drown in sorrow as she collapsed, powerless. Eldris moved to Varen's side, but his steps faltered. His gaze flicked to Selene lying on the ground, the tears streaming down her face. "You can take the artifact and go, Eldris." Varen stared at Selene like a predator stalking prey. Selene could barely raise her head, her strength sapped, her soul broken. Varen's form wavered in her vision, little more than a mocking shadow. Was this how it ended? With her sister's salvation stolen in the name of some twisted secret plot, Then, in an instant, Eldris did the unexpected. He took a step back from Varen. "No," he whispered, planting himself between him and the entrance. "I cannot let you do this. I promise to help you, but I refuse to pay with Selene's life. That is too steep a price." Varen's eyes blazed. "You dare defy me? Your father's curse will never be lifted if you break your promise to me." Eldris steeled himself. "Better that than living with the guilt this would bring." Varen lunged at Eldris, summoning swirling shadows that coiled around his arms. Eldris parried desperately as Selene summoned her last reserves of strength. She remembered the training her mother had given her and poured all her focus into the orb. There it was, some small power she could use deep within it. The orb began to glow brightly in Varen's hands. The unexpected brightness caused Varen to stumble backwards over a rock. Eldris seized the opportunity to knock the orb from his grasp, sending it skittering across the floor to Selene. She clutched the orb, feeling its warmth spread through her body, its hopeful light giving her a burst of renewed energy. With a final surge of power, Selene directed the orb's full light at Varen. The radiant beam cascaded over him like a waterfall of luminescence until he could no longer bear it. Casting one last hateful look at Selene, he darted away into the darkness of the cavern's far corridor, vanishing like a fading nightmare. Silence enveloped them, broken only by the dripping of water from the stalactites above. Selene sank to her knees, the orb clasped tightly to her chest. She was shaking, partly from the aftershock of the magic, partly from the pain of betrayal. Eldris dropped down beside her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked. "I was desperate. I never wanted you harmed." In Selene's eyes, tears glimmered. She believed him, for she understood how far one would go to save a loved one. "Help me stand," she said quietly. Eldris offered his arm, and together they rose. Now that she held the orb not just in her hand but also in her mind, Selene felt a connection to its power. She just knew it could cure her sister. It had to. Or perhaps it could be used to break the curse on Eldris's father. But she also knew the orb had very limited power. She had read such in the old manuscripts. This was a gift that would only be used once. Selene's heart pounded. She could save Elora, or she could help Eldris. But not both. In the depths of her soul, Selene felt her sister's presence, as if Elora herself stood there, urging her to do what was right. After all, Elora was the head of their household, the one who insisted that their healing gifts be used for the good of all, not just themselves. She gazed at Eldris, remembering their shared past. The moment he rescued a trapped bird, the trust she had once placed in him. Would she betray his desperate hope as he had nearly betrayed hers? A gentle light spread across the orb, and Selene saw in Eldris's eyes the faint flicker of hope. It broke her heart, but she pressed the orb into his hands. "Save your father," she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "My sister would insist on it. She always taught me that life is about sacrifice." Trembling, Eldris tried to give the orb back to her. "No, you need it for Elora." She placed her hand on his, shaking her head. "This is the path we choose. Healing is our calling. I trust that somehow I'll find another way. Or, if not, then let this be my final gift to my sister. She taught me that if we do not stand for others, we stand for nothing." Eldris bowed his head, weeping openly, haunted by her grace. He pressed his forehead to hers. "This world doesn't deserve you." They emerged from the cavern together, each step heavy with exhaustion. The sky was a soft gray, the first hints of sunrise glowing on the horizon. Seabirds called as the tide receded from the cliffs below. Selene looked down at her empty hands, feeling both sorrow and release. Eldris stood beside her, the orb tucked safely within his pack. They parted ways at the base of the tidal cliffs. Eldris would travel to his father immediately. Selene would return to Morne to care for Elora as best she could. She had no illusions that she could find another ancient artifact like this one, but her heart was lighter, even amidst her grief, for she knew she had upheld the legacy of House Marisol, the spirit of compassion and selflessness that made them healers worth remembering. Selene closed her eyes, feeling the beginnings of a fragile hope stir within her. As Selene returned to their family's keep, she braced herself to see her sister and explain what had happened. She wanted to be honest with her, but also wanted to find some way to communicate hope for an answer that she didn't yet have. She had no idea how she was going to do that. She went directly to Elora's bedroom, only to find the bed empty. "Where?" she managed to croak, her voice choked with dread, fearing the worst. A chambermaid, seemingly surprised at Selene's alarm, replied, "Varin has taken her to the Great Hall." Realization struck Selene like a lightning bolt. Varin had returned to the castle. This was far from finished. Without forming any plan, she sprinted through the royal chambers and into the courtyard, single-minded in her focus on Elora's safety. Selene shoved the doors of the great hall open and practically fell through them. Elora sat at one end of the hall, upright in her chair, a sight Selene had not seen for many months. Varin sat at her right hand, breathless and confounded. Selene struggled to speak, to warn her sister. But why was she? Elora held up one hand with strength and authority. "Sit, my sister." "But," Selene started. "Sit," Elora repeated, her tone allowing no argument. Selene obeyed. Varin didn't seem to be threatening her. He seemed almost submissive. "My dear sister," Elora began with a gentle smile, "you have always been the soul of this house. You have always been the best of us. I am sorry for what I have put you through these last several months, but I had to be certain." Selene's face showed her utter confusion. Elora continued, "And now I am." "Varin is not your enemy. He has done everything faithfully as I have asked." Selene interrupted. "You cannot mean—" "Varin only acted upon my will," replied Elora. "He did exactly as I commanded him to do, just as your friend Eldris did, though not without some objection. You may join us, Eldris." Eldris appeared from the shadows of the back hall and sat at the table, refusing to look at Selene, clearly ashamed. Selene glared at him, both in anger and relief. Varin offered no defense, meeting Selene's gaze only long enough to show a flicker of remorse. "Selene, I have given you all that I can give you, and I have given this kingdom all that I can give to it, except this last thing. A parting gift, if you will. I am abdicating the rule of this household. There is one far more fit to serve that role, and I would only be in her way. In your way, Selene." "Elora, stop it," objected Selene. "Selene, I am sorry to test you the way I have, but I had to know if you would adhere to the precepts of our house above the thing which I knew you loved most in this life, me. I now know you are far more worthy than any other to rule. I wish there were magical healing orbs that could heal any sickness, but alas, healing these lands will take much more work than that, and I believe you are up to that labor. You are the one who will lead us through the dark night to come, and we will all be better for it." Selene bowed her head and wept softly. She was overwhelmed by a cascade of emotions, relief that her sister was safe, yet she also felt anger at being misled and guilt for having fallen for the ruse in front of everyone. Still, she knew in her heart that Elora was not truly deceitful and that no harm had been intended. Everything Elora did, she did for the kingdom and for Selene. Elora rose to leave the room. As she passed Selene, she touched her shoulder gently. We shall announce my abdication to the kingdom on the morrow, and then the keep will be yours. I intend to take Varin with me. He is my protector, and knowing you, I'm not sure you'll forgive him for my deceit. As for Eldris, his fate rests entirely in your hands." Selene turned her gaze to Eldris, recalling how he once rescued a frail bird tangled in brambles, and in that moment he looked every bit as vulnerable. She felt a wave of compassion as a quiet laugh escaped her, causing Eldris to blink in confusion. "I think I will keep him," she said at last, her smile gentle despite all that had transpired. This concludes The Tears of House Marisol by C.T. Stewart.